Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is color. If you've watched any of my videos, I'm sure you can gather I love a pop of color in the home. Even watching this video, I have a few pops of color going on, and I've gotten some questions on how to do that. Because color can be very scary, especially nowadays. I feel like the design world isn't really going towards color, or at least the e-commerce side of design. When you go into a Target, there's not a ton of color, and if there is color, it's shades of green, terracotta, blush, which, don't get me wrong, I do love those colors, but they can get very boring. And I think if your house is only those tones, it can feel a little flat. So I'm gonna give y'all some tips on how I implement color and how to ease your way into having a colorful home. My first tip would be to start small. You don't have to go painting your walls a funky color, doing anything drastic, getting a colorful couch. Just start with a small object. That object can be a lampshade, it can be a painted dresser, it can be a pillow, it can be anything that is not going to be a huge investment, but you just want to try out a fun new color. Personally, I love doing pops of color in candlesticks, like these candlesticks back here, or like a teal shade. Artwork is another great way of implementing color, but I'll get to that later. Small shelving units, like this one back here, is a bright red. Something that is a little bit out of your comfort zone, but introduces color in a small way, but still adds a fun element to your space. So let's say, for example, your entire house is tones of beige and white and cream, and you're wanting to do something a little different. If that were my house, I would maybe add in a fun red picture frame or an accent chair. You guys know I love chairs where you stack books on top of them. I've said it in so many videos, but that is a really fun way to add a bright pop of color. It adds a focal point to the room. You can put it on a blank wall, and you can add color through what you put on top of that chair. Maybe it's a lamp, maybe it's books. Also, flowers are a great way to implement color. They can change a space drastically. And I know that might be like, duh, flowers are colorful, but going and getting some really unique flowers, they don't have to be expensive. Go to Trader Joe's, have fun making like a little bouquet. It'll maybe cost $12. You can put them in a fun vase. I love flowers and I love collecting fun vases, which you can also have fun with the color of those. Basically, my first tip is just having a small little item to dip your toe in the water of color. I mentioned artwork a little bit earlier, and artwork is one of the easiest ways to add color. I have this piece back here that's original, and it has blues and purples and greens, and I feel like it really goes well with this wall color, which, by the way, is called Contented by Sherwin-Williams. It is a Fair and Bald dupe for their shade Mizzle. Artwork is definitely a very easy and obtainable way to add in color. I would definitely avoid modern abstract black and white pictures if you're trying to implement color. One, it's just nothing that we haven't seen before, and it's not going to give you a super amazing point of interest in your home. It's just going to blend into the void of neutral colors. So this is a really fun time to add in a little bit of color. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, maybe a shade of green, blue, whatever you want. You can also have fun with, like I said, the picture frame. Make it a pop of color. You can paint it yourself. You can order a fun one. The options are endless. My next tip is to pick a print or pattern and build off of that. Oftentimes I see designers taking like a wallpaper, picking a color from that and painting the trim, going off of just that wallpaper and not expanding outside that color palette. And I think this can lead the room to feel very flat. Though it can look like a really nice put together room, it can also feel weirdly uninspired because nothing is out of the ordinary. Everything is expected. So if I were to choose a fun wallpaper with shades of yellow and pink and purple, I would choose a complementary color to that pattern to add some interest. If I'm gonna paint the trim around the walls, I would do something just a little bit different that doesn't exactly match the pattern. So for instance, if I had a wallpaper that had a lot of cool tones, I could still choose a cool tone paint, but I wouldn't choose one where that color is already in the pattern. You can definitely do this if you want, but if you do choose a color that's already in the pattern, I would advise you to pick other pieces for the space with complementing colors. So if you have a pale blue trim, maybe go for a pop of red or bright orange, which I know might sound crazy, like bright orange, who would use that? But I promise if you add in the tiniest bit of neon or a bright color or a really dark color, it will instantly make the space look more unique. Even if that color is not repeated anywhere else in the house, I think that makes it even more fun. As you can see, my walls are like this greeny color, and I have these candles up here that are like an orange, and I don't have this color anywhere else in my house, but I think if I were to choose candles that were blue or purple, the whole space would feel pretty flat, especially if I chose a piece over here. This is a bright red. If I chose a shelving unit that was blue or anything that kind of faded into the wall color, it would just kind of fall flat and there wouldn't be any interest in the room. Going along with my first tip of starting small, I think a fun neon or just a bright saturated color to go with your wallpaper and trim can really help, whether it's a lampshade on your sconce or just a table lamp or even a bright colored tray. It adds depth to the space and it just makes it feel less perfect, if that makes sense. I have like a visceral reaction to spaces that feel like they are permanent. Like, this is it. I designed this space. This is exactly how it's staying. I just can't get behind that. I know it looks good for sure, but I think things are more fun when it's constantly evolving. What I personally love in design and why I'm such a fan of people like Luke Edward Hall, Matilda Goad, I talk about these people way too much. But what I love about their style is it's never finished. And I think that's what makes a room so special and why I love color. Because if you, let's say, go furniture shopping and you buy all your furniture and you choose a color palette off of that and then that's it, I think it can fall flat. The space just doesn't look personal. And I think what color can do for a space is really show the personality of the person living there. Beata Heyman, one of my favorite designers, always says a room should sing. And I think that just means when you walk into a room, it just clearly shows personality. It's vibrant, whether that's through the colors or just the amount of personality and texture in the space. I just think going into a space where you can clearly see this person has interest in their items, they're well thought through, but they're also well loved. I think that's much more interesting than going into a space where you know where everything is from and you can easily replicate that yourself. For wall colors, as I mentioned, this color is Contented from Sherwin-Williams. I mentioned in my last video of my home updates how I'm a huge fan of Farrow and Ball colors, but they can be quite pricey, so you can go to like Lowe's and get them color matched. I love a colored wall. There's not one wall in our house that is a neutral color, even though I think this color is neutral. The way I chose my wall colors is a lot of my furniture is a color. I have some wood tones. I said in a video a while ago that like I don't like wood, which then I thought back, I'm like, that's not true. People were like, you need wood in your house. I was like, okay, you're right. But a lot of my furniture is a color, a shade of a color. So I wanted something that is still a fun, bright color. And by bright, I mean just light and airy, but I didn't want something where I would get tired of it in a couple months. For a wall color, which I know can be really scary, especially if you're hiring someone, because that's not cheap and you don't want to redo it 6 months later. So pick a color that goes or complements your furniture. If you know you have a ton of wood tones, like warm wood, maybe it's mid-century modern, I would either go warm toned as well or a nice cool tone, but not a gray leaning cool tone. This in the camera, I can't tell if it looks gray to y'all or not. It's like a foamy green blue, if that makes sense. But if I were to have a ton of wood furniture, I think this color would look great with it. You can kind of tell like my fireplace is brick, and I don't think it competes with the brick or makes the brick look grayed out. I love the look of an entire space being so like cocoon-like and warm toned, but I also think the spaces that are like that, where they have warm toned walls and a warm toned furniture collection, there's always an element of a different complementing color. For instance, Lucy Williams' house, she has a living room where it's drenched in color, which I'll talk about drenching your house in a second. But from ceiling to floor, her walls are blue, her bookshelves are blue, but her couch is a really nice, it's honestly the same color as my couch, which is like a warm, sunny golden color. So if she were to choose a cool tone gray couch, the whole space would look very off. It would feel very cold. There'd be no warmth, there'd be no soul because her walls are such a light sky blue. You really want to complement that with another shade. And you can always go back to the color wheel and complementing colors. I love primary colors, so I always kind of resort back to that. I have a lot of red, yellow, blue in my house, and I think that always looks good. And for instance, if you had a super warm toned wall color, like it's a deep olive green with a hint of yellow in it, and you have all warm wood furniture, this is where I would add in the tip I had of starting small, like a bright lampshade, maybe a chartreuse lampshade or a pale blue, something that just kind of is unexpected and offsets the color palette, but in the best way, and it complements and doesn't make the space feel so flat. Basically what I'm saying in this whole video is color helps make your space not flat. Like I just said with the unexpected element, this really adds depth to your space. I mentioned it with these candles and the shelving unit and the bright lampshade. Oftentimes the spaces I'm most attracted to have an element in the room, whether it's a lamp, a frame, a chair, where it's drastically different than the rest of the space. If the whole space, like I said, is warm tone, it's a cool tone chair or something like that. I'm a huge fan of DIY projects, so if you want a pop of color in a picture frame, easiest DIY ever, go get yourself a sample of paint, paint it, boom, instant interest in the space. Art is another great way of adding an unexpected element. If you can already tell, I love hand-drawn, kind of messy, whimsical pieces. That's pretty much all the art is in my house. I love things that look like a child did it or actual children's art framed. The next tip I have, which I have done a little bit in my house, is painting your trim. I mentioned this just a few minutes ago with the pattern. If you're choosing a wallpaper pattern, I would choose a contrasting color for the trim. Even if you just do the windows in your bedroom like I did, since we rent this house, as much as I want to paint every windowsill and all the trim, it's just not wise. But I did do it in the bedrooms because they're small and I was like, why not? So I chose contrasting color in my son's room. I did his windowsills like a tomatoey reddish, almost orange, and then his walls are the same color as this living room, and he has yellow curtains, so it's all kind of primary colors and it just adds a point of interest. Before we painted his windowsills, it just looked very flat because, like I said, this color is a cool tone, so it can easily go very muted and flat if you don't have that contrasting color. So that's exactly what we did in his room. And in our bedroom, I painted the windowsills like a powdery blue, and our walls are a really pretty like lilac shade. I also have a pillow in there that I made from Liberty, or the fabric is from Liberty, and I chose a lot of colors for the bedroom out of that pillow, but there are some contrasting elements in the room because, like I said, if I chose all the color palette to be exactly from that pillow, it would look just kind of off. It would look like a store display in my opinion, and I don't like that. So I chose a powdery blue to contrast with the pinky toned walls, and then our nightstands are a bright Kelly green. And I also just added a bright mustardy quilt at the end of the bed, which really helps amplify the color in that space. So painting the trim, I'm a huge fan of it. I was watching Beetlejuice actually the other day. Love that movie. But the trim in their house or their bedroom was a pale blue. And I was like, oh, so this has been around for a long, long time. So this is nothing new. Like, this has been going on forever. But there's something about trim being a bright, not even bright, a contrasting color to the walls. I just love it. It adds so much interest to the space. I also love if the trim is a deeper shade than the walls. It can still be the same color palette. It's just a darker shade of the same color. I really like that, and I think it looks really great. Even though it's the same color, it still adds depth because it's darker, which goes into my next point, which is choosing different shades of the same color. So if you have light blue walls, maybe doing a deeper blue curtain. For our dining room, which is just right over here off camera, we have our dining chairs in a bright, like, grass green, and I think it really complements the wall color because the walls are green toned. That are my neon element, even though it's not neon, it's just very bright. I think it really brightens the area, and it's contrasting next to our dining table, which is a deep, deep burgundy. And I think all three of those colors, the pale green on the wall, the bright green on the chair, and the burgundy of the table, really mesh well together. As I mentioned earlier, drenching your space is something that I wish I could do in my home, but like I said, I rent, so I don't think it'd be super wise to paint every nook and cranny. But if I owned this house, I 100% would. So like an example I mentioned earlier, Lucy Williams' house, from ceiling to floor, that room is blue. But the key to drenching your space is to have different finishes. So usually trim is a more shiny, satiny finish, and then the walls are flat. Or if you have a satiny wall color, you could do the trim in like a lacquer where it's like super shiny. Someone's house that does this very well is Sky McAlpine. Her library is something I dream about. It is so incredible. It's a lacquer finish. She describes it as a lipstick red, which couldn't be a more perfect description. I need to have a room in my next home that color. It is so beautiful, but it's a lacquer, and I feel like if it wasn't a lacquer, it could look very dark and dominating. The lacquer just adds that element of lightness because it's so shiny. The sun hits it and it just adds light and sparkle to the space. Especially if you're going for a really dark shade, it's important to have lighter elements so it doesn't feel like claustrophobic. But it's important to remember your finishes. You don't want to paint windowsills in a matte color. I don't know why, like, I need to research the actual reason behind this. I'm sure it has something to do with light because it's a window, but remember to do different finishes from the wall to the trim. And I think that's all my tips. I love color. Hopefully some of these tips were helpful to y'all. I always recommend color in your home. The first thing I always do in a space is choose the wall color and go off of that. I choose all my furniture based on that. I just can't design a space without knowing the wall color. So those are all of my tips. Hopefully this was helpful. I love color. If I left anything out or you're still wondering, like you're still lost, I don't know what to do, please leave a comment and I will respond, trying to help. I definitely want to do a video on pattern as well. I feel like pattern may be even trickier to implement in your home, especially mixing patterns. So let me know if you're interested in that. I love these topics. I could talk about it all day long. So hopefully this helped, and I will see y'all in the next video.